Okay, so we were looking at this example here, this example where we've configured these button controls to handle events. And you can see it's a simple idea that's very, very, very powerful. And think about it, without something like this, the controls would not really be useful. You know, if you just clicked them and nothing happened, that wouldn't be of much use to anybody. So this is an example of event-driven programming. So very simply, we're going to contrast event-driven programming with procedural programming. And procedural programming is exactly what it sounds like. Uh, uh, Code is executed in a linear fashion, just sort of a serial flow, and it's executed in some sort of procedural order. In event-driven programming, code is executed when an event occurred or upon activation of events. Think about that for a minute. Think about how cool that is. Code is executed upon activation of events. Now go back just for a second to our little example here. So code is executed upon activation of events. What is the event? The event is one of these buttons getting clicked. Do you know when the buttons are going to be clicked? Do you know when the user is going to click the button? You don't. You don't know. However, and this is the part that's so cool, however, you now have a situation where you can write code to handle something and you don't know, and you don't really need to know exactly when that's going to happen. So this code that we're about to learn how to write, this code is executed in response to some event. Let's just look at it in a little bit more detail. So how do we handle events and in a GUI? So in a GUI, you generally have controls. Controls, in they used to be called widgets, but we call them controls in JFX. So we've got some kind of a source object, and in our example, we've got a button. So we've got some kind of a source object, and the source object or the source control is said to fire the event. And buttons fire what's called action events. So a preview of coming attractions, we're going to have an event object, an event class, and we're going to have many subclasses for the different kinds of events. Buttons fire action events, and it's the source of the event. We have an event object that represents the event. So, and we've got a handler or a listener object. So, and this is sometimes referred to as a delegation example. The control fires an event. There's an object associated with that event, and the handling, the dispatch, if you will, of that event is delegated by a listener or a handler that processes the event handler object. And this is the code that we're about to learn how to write. So let's look at an example of this. Again, control fires event, a listener or a handler responds, and code is executed in the presence of that event. So here's our example. We've got some startup code, public class handle event extends application. Okay, fair enough. We're going to create our controls the usual way. Now, here, notice what's going on. Let's look at this OK button. That's called BT OK in our example. And here's actually the code. So here's button OK. BT OK equals new button OK. So nothing too mysterious going on there. Notice what we've got here. This is new. We've got something called an OK handler class its name is handler1, and here we just created new OK handler class. Now, what do? We take our button OK and we associate a handler for that, a listener that will handle the event. So we've got a special method here, set on action, and it takes one parameter. It takes this handler. So what we've done here, we've associated the event handler for button OK with this object called handler1 of type OK handler class. So let's look. You can see it right down here. Let's look at this OK handler class. Now, just a few lines of code, but there's a couple of important things going on here. So, and notice here what this is. This is just a little class, all of its own. It's a standalone class. It's a standalone class with one method. That's all it's got. It's a class with one method, and that method is called handler. Now let's look right away at the declaration. Class OK handler implements event handler. What is that? So we don't know maybe what an event handler is. So what are we going to do? We're going to look it up. So here it is in the Open JFX documentation. So interface, so check it out. Interface event handler, angle brackets T extends event. Let's not worry about that too much for a second, but we're going there shortly. So notice it's an interface. It's an interface. If you don't know what is an interface, pretty simply, an interface is a collection of one or more methods or constants without any implementation. So it's just the method signatures. A class that implements an interface guarantees that it provides an implementation for all the method signatures in that class, in that interface. Now, this is a very simple interface. It's an interface event handler has one method. It has one method called handle. So it only has one method called handle. So our class, OK handler, that implements event handler is saying, okay, I guarantee that I have an implementation of this handle method. And here is that implementation. So hang with that for a minute and we'll look at these angle brackets and action event in our next video.